Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Ann Arbor Area Transportation Authority Board of Directors Retreat. It's Wednesday, April 26th, and we're grateful if you were able to come join us. Currently, we are going to approve the agenda, and I'm wondering if someone would like to make a motion.
So moved, Rich.
Rich, and seconded by Cindy. All in favor, raise your hands. Wonderful. Next on our agenda is general announcements. I have two. First, I'd like to congratulate Jesse Miller. He was just reappointed by the city of Ypsilanti to our board. Yay. Yay.
Stuck with me for another 5 years.
Did you want to share anything else besides we're stuck with you?
No, it was a pretty painless process. There were no other candidates. And I think the mayor, I did actually talk about it, she even forgot to hold discussion about it. It was proposed, seconded, and they voted. And then they're like, it's okay.
Well, we're very happy to have you continue. And then next is I'd like to welcome Elizabeth Gerber, who likes to go by Liz. She was recently appointed by the city of Ann Arbor to our board, and I'm wondering if you'd like to maybe share a little bit about yourself or why you're interested in being with us.
Sure, I'd love to. Well, thank you. Hello, everybody. Hi. Nice to see you all. So yes, I go by Liz, and I am a long-term resident of the city of Ann Arbor. I actually have 3 degrees from the University of Michigan and then went away for a while, and I teach at the University of Michigan in the School of Public Policy. And guess what I study? Transportation. I served on the RTA Board of Directors. I was one of the inaugural directors in that entity from 2013 to 2018, where I met Susan. I studied public policy. So this is a really interesting opportunity for me personally to learn, but most importantly to serve. I am an avid public transit proponent. While I was on the RTA board, I worked very hard to try to improve the service in the entire region, but mostly, well, it was complicated because we were setting up this entity at the very beginning, and the 4 counties that are part of the RTA are very different. You've got Wayne, Oakland, Macomb, which have elected executives and a much different governance structure, and Washtenaw. And so it was really important to me to make sure that Washtenaw was well represented. I know this board is different, and so I'm excited to bring some of the insights that I brought from that experience here, but also first and foremost to understand what the values and the goals and the priorities are of this board, and to do my part to help serve our community. So I'm really just thrilled to be here, and looking forward to working with all of you and you.
Well, welcome. Liz.
Thank you.
I got so excited. There may be other announcements. I'm not sure, but I completely forgot public comment. But is there anyone, Deb? There's not. I didn't see anyone in the room, and I didn't see anybody up there, but so I apologize for that faux pas. Were there any other general announcements? I can't see you back there, Matt. So do you have anything?
Thank you.
Okay, wonderful. So we're all here today because our wonderful governance coach, Rose Mercier, has developed a little bit of a training exercise for us. So I'm just going to turn it right over to Rose.
Okay, we're here because you asked me to be here. So I didn't make you invite me. And I mean, I'll probably just sit and stand at the same time. So I'm also going to just say up front, I don't have a cough. I'm allergic to spring, and it manifests itself in this lovely asthmatic cough, which makes me crazy. But so just if I cough, you're not going to catch anything unless you are catching allergies. So anyhow, and I am really pleased to be here. We are going to shoot up the PowerPoint thing. Yeah. Okay. And just because I can't remember what I'm saying without looking at stuff. The excuse me. Yeah. we wanna go to the beginning. It doesn't really matter. That's fine. That's okay. If you can start there, it's fine. Yeah, it's just the title page, so. Start the slideshow. Okay, perfect. All right. And I have to learn how to use this fancy thing. Oh, all right. They don't, I'll just put that in, it's doing stuff I don't want to do. Anyway, I thought what we might start with, so I will tell you, I'm really happy to be here. I haven't been in Ann Arbor since, June of 2019, I think, when we did the ENDS development workshop in the library. And that was another event, traveling here, which was great. And I also did a workshop probably in maybe the year before with Kathleen and Jesse and some other, I think, staff people were part of that. We did sort of an intro to policy governance here. So it's been a while, and it's really nice to be back. I really, yeah, I'm really happy to be here. And I'm excited about this because this is a brand, sometimes probably any of you who do workshops or lead things, you paste and cut and put things together, which I do quite often. But this was like a whole brand new thing that was created just for you. So it certainly has some pieces from things I've done, but it was really tailored to fit what you wanted to do, which is learn to write and develop policy. Okay. All right. So having done that, I thought maybe just a quick go around and a word that describes your thoughts about being here. I'm going to start with Kyra.
All right. About what we're doing.
Yeah, just, yeah.
I would say curious.
Okay.
Eager.
Okay.
What did you say?
Eager.
Oh, okay, open.
Necessary.
Okay.
Intrigued.
Okay.
New.
Every single one of those.
Okay. So Mike?
I would say, because it's about policy, the word I would use is fundamental.
Okay. All right. Nice. And Susan?
I'm going to come right back to the beginning and say curious.
Okay. It's good. All righty. So what we're going to do, she says, I got instructions. So why we're doing this, one is just so that you can become more comfortable when you're writing new policy. And what we're doing today, for some of you, it's going to be, as I think half of you were here when I said this, it'll be a review, right? Will be things that we've covered before, or we've talked about in the service committee, or sometimes the monitoring committee, although we've kind of moved over into policy review sometimes. For some of you, it will be brand new, which is okay. So stop and ask questions whenever you want. This is really pretty, I'd say it's informal, all right? So we can stop and talk, and you can ask questions, make challenging comments, whatever, as we go along. And for some of you, you'll be waiting to get to the let's do some work now part, okay? So just understand that everybody's going to be in a different place with some of this. It's also just to deepen your understanding of when to write policy that sets direction, and when you want to set policy that sets boundaries. And they're both equally important, because they're not, one isn't more important than the other when it comes to the board being able to set direction for the CEO. We know this is partly why we're doing this, is to try and avoid using the assessment of monitoring reports as a way to revise policy. So it's a way to signal that you want to revise policy. And I think that we've come into those situations a couple of times in the last year. And then we're going to just practice using existing tools, which is like policy 301 as a guideline for thinking about, okay, when do we write policy now, or don't we, or what kind of policy? And also just some other tools that I will sometimes use in policy, like 5 whys and logic models, and some of those may be familiar to you, and some of them may not be. So
Okay.
Yep.
Can you go back to that slide again? So
maybe maybe we can just a second here. I'm not.
doubt, you can use the arrows on.
There we go. Okay,
So that third bullet point of
Yeah.
avoid using assessment and monitor advice policy, I'm probably very dense, but I'm not sure I'm fully confident.
well, so a couple of the instances where I've been providing feedback on the board meetings is we end up, you're discussing the monitoring report and assessing the monitoring report, but it ends up being a discussion about what the policy should be saying, right? So what we want to try and do is discuss monitoring of it, monitoring. And if there are problems, right, if the monitoring says, we maybe haven't got this policy right, or it doesn't say what we want it to say. And so therefore, the monitoring board isn't kind of shaping up. So if we
Okay.
can recall, I'm sure we probably recall the
Oh, yeah,
last,
very
yeah, okay, yes.
Got it.
The last,
So it's not that we can't use the monitor report to say like, we do need to revise the policy, it's just like, don't use that discussion time.
yeah, it's to say that's not the purpose of monitoring, but it is a good time to say, this isn't saying what we want it to say, or it isn't precise enough, or we need to kind of go back and visit it. And I think that's part of the process that you're implementing in as we go forward, is really being able to identify what things do we need to, or what things come up that suggest we need to monitor or review policy content, and how do we set up a regular process of content review, right?
Rose, could I interrupt?
Yes.
What I'm seeing on the screen is just saying getting started. Is it possible to see what you're talking about in the room?
Well, that's a good question.
Are you not seeing the bullet points on that screen?
The only bullet point I see, the word that describes your thoughts about the session.
Okay. Can you see something
I
else now?
presume Susan is seeing the same.
Yep, no, same thing. It's not moving. It's just staying at getting started, a word that describes your thoughts.
Okay.
Wow.
Physicist K.
Let me stop share.
Okay.
Let me try it on mine really quick. and then
Okay.
You can always tell me when to move. Give me a second.
Okay.
Now I think
Yep,
getting it.
Now
Yep.
you're good? Okay.
yep, thank
All
you,
Great, thanks.
thank you.
Two.
Now if you can go on to the next one.
Yes, go on to the next one. Yeah, so there's a lot of.
Okay.
Miss Deborah. Just warning. Okay, next. All right. So the general plan is this is, you can probably just do, I just had a thought.
Go to the next one.
Go to the next one, but I was thinking, what I could do is I could plug in my remote into your computer.
Ah, yes.
Excellent idea. Hang on just a second.
Oh, hey, Deb, can we discuss that closed captioning toast thing, too, please? You're able to.
Hey, okay. I do that every time I use it. Where is it? So. See how that works.
You might need to click on the presentation again.
This device is ready.
Okay.
But you're gonna need to click on the presentation to make it be active.
Do you have to point
No.
it at Mike?
No, it's going.
Okay.
Okay, so that's interesting.
One thing.
All right, general plan. It's okay. It's working, I think.
It's
Sorry, on that other
computer,
computer.
it's on this computer.
Yeah.
No, it's on here.
No, there's a message that we received that's kind of driving us nuts.
Okay, okay. Got it. All right. Oh, there we go. Okay. So you can see this now as well, Mike and Susan, just. Yes, perfect. All right. So we're gonna look at policy in policy governance. Curiously enough, that's why it's called policy governance, because you actually use policies to govern. We're going to spend most of our time in terms of just developing policies and figuring out which category stuff goes into, how to nest policies or policy sizes. We have a really fun exercise to do, and practicing. So we're gonna, this is probably the last hour and a bit of this. We're actually going to just work in smaller groups with a particular policy at your choice. We have some possibilities, and just give you a chance to kind of just work with that, so we can, you know, work with it and get some active feedback as we go. Sound like a plan? All right. So the policy and policy governance is not the more familiar sort of policies and procedures that you find in many organizations. Right? It's policy that is specifically the tool of the board. Right? It's specifically created and structured for the board's job, which is to set direction, protect the organization, and deliver accountability to those that you're governing on behalf of. Right? And so the policies are set up so that they actually cover everything in the organization, right? So they're comprehensive. You don't have policies somewhere else, right? Like this is it. This powerful little document basically says everything that you want to say about everything in the organization. Yes. Okay, so distinguishing characteristic of policies is that they control everything, right? They embrace all of governance and all of management. And as you know, they embrace management by essentially putting, you know, ensuring that you put off limits any means to accomplish the ends that would be unacceptable to the board because it's unethical or it's imprudent or obviously unlawful. They're written, all right? So they're not in the minutes of the board meetings. They're not something that, you know, has been understood or a committee set them up. They're all written. They're able to state what the board wants to say in an enduring manner, right? Like so that they're always there and they're always current, right? And they really are, if you will, other than the articles of incorporation and the bylaws, they're the paramount document for the board. They come in sizes, as we know, is that they control, what they really do is control the broadest decisions first, and then narrow that decision to a point where you're willing to accept any reasonable interpretation. Right? They're created in size sequence. So you don't start by writing a policy that's kind of several levels of detail down. You really start by saying, here's the biggest policy. So with executive limitations, you know that it's, you know, don't do anything that's unlawful, imprudent, unethical, or contrary to common business ethics or whatever. You've got a couple of other things in there. And then you write something next, right? So it's not like you don't kind of throw a dartboard, where will we start, right? It's really saying we're going to work our way down until we think we've said enough. They're accurate and concise. So hence that article about trying to be both a wordsmith and word smart, and not use more words than you need to. I always say, like, I try to get rid of adjectives and adverbs as much as possible in policies and just say what you need to say. They're really set up in 4 categories that are really tailored for governing, right? So they're about, as we'll discover, how the board sets direction, how the board protects the organization, you know, from risk, and how the board governs itself in order to be accountable, right, to the town, the cities and townships that you're governing on behalf of those residents and those councils, And they also set out how the board will delegate its authority and ensure that those that are delegated authority are accountable for the use of that authority, right? And so that is actually the job of government. And so those categories cover off or tailored specifically for a board to govern. They're in regular use, right? You don't finish them and then set them aside in somebody's office. They're always generated by the board. They're not generated by management for board approval. Just, you know, if you've been on other boards, you'll often see that that happens, right? Management comes and goes, I'd like you to approve this. And we're like, okay, that's great. And policies are current, hence the importance of that content review on a regular basis. And they're centrally available, right? So that's easy enough. You just go on the website and there they are. Okay. So what you want is that all of the policies are really values put into words, right? And so that's why we often say, so what's the value that underlies this policy? What's the value that underlies what you're worried about, right? So that you can figure out, is this a value about what the results the organization should produce? Is it a value about how operationally things are done? Is it a value about the process of governing? So our work as a board, or is it a value that's related to how we delegate authority and assess its use? Right? Interesting, well, maybe not that interesting, but when John Carver was actually initially developing policies, he thought he might call it value governance. And then he realized, yeah, really what policies are, in fact, values put into words or expressed in policies. And so we have these policies. So we have ends and limitations, executive limitations that are the way the board directs, the CEO. We have governance process and board management delegation, which is how the board directs itself. And remember, you have one category of ends, right, which are very special and very uniquely designed, if you will. And you have policies that are about the means that staff use, right? And you have policies which are about board needs, right? Which is, it's always the how. So it's always, you've probably heard this 100 times. Ends are always about what benefit for whom at what worth. And everything else is a means. So the purpose of those policies really is ends. Well, we've just said this, is it's designed to say, what are the results and benefits that the agency is to produce for whom, right, and at what worth. It has set boundaries. Executive limitations are designed to set boundaries of ethics and prudence around, oh, there we go, how perfect, thank you. Can I bring you along to some other presentations?
Independent consulting.
So executive limitations really set boundaries of ethics and prudence around the organization's methods, activities, conduct, and risks. And then you've got policies which the board directs itself that says, here's how we'll do our job. Here's how we fulfill our accountability to the owners or those that we're governing on behalf of. And board management delegation is, here's how we will delegate authority. Here's how we hold those that we delegate authority for or to accountable for the use of that authority. Most times it's related to how you delegate authority to the CEO. So if we were just thinking about this, some of these are actually in your policies. So where would you put, if you were concerned about, we might hire people that have previously been elected to one of the township councils or the city of Ann Arbor or whatever, and they were looking for a job and they wanted to work here. And you were going like, yeah, I'm not sure that's a good idea. Where would you put that? What category of policy does that fit in? Yeah. I think probably we have one. A committee to consider CEO compensation if you were to have such a committee.
Governance. Not CEO.
Probably better in how you delegate authority and account for its use. So that's where we go. Okay, we know the safety of the traveling public. Pardon me. Nope.
ELs.
Yeah, it's probably those executive limitations. It's an interesting one, right? Because I think what, well, you could think about that in terms of potentially, if what you're saying is that what we really want to ensure is produced is that transportation is safe, could possibly be an end. It's more likely to be a concern about what would be improved with respect to the travel, safety of traveling public. So it's usually going to end up as an executive limitation, but you raise an interesting point, right? Equity, this is my favorite just because it's everybody's topic of conversation these days.
And
Well, I feel like it
Possibly.
would depend on how, like, equity is such a broad term. If you're talking about like equity and how staff is treated,
Yeah.
then you can go with ends limitations, but if we're talking about equitable provision of service, that
Yeah.
might be more. ends.
It could also be in governance process. Right? I mean, it's, as I always say, it's kind of, it could go pretty much anywhere, right? And it's so, just because I probably have more conversations these days about equity, diversion, and inclusion than anything else. People say, well, we'd like to write a statement. I'm going, I'm not sure that's actually what you want to do. I'm not sure that makes any difference. Let's talk about either what you're worried about or what you aspire to make happen, and think about where that goes, because it could actually be in any policy category or in every policy category. So it's
that's a question, Rose.
yeah,
What if it's in both? Like, is that proper in
it's,
this model?
but I think when you think about this, is that the value of equity, it's not so much that the value of equity expresses itself in a lot of different ways, right? So whether it's hiring practices, or it's salaries, or it's composition of boards, or it's provision of service, it could be expressed in a number of different areas, and that's okay. What you don't want to have is a duplication of the same, if you will. Policy should be mutually exclusive. So yeah, so it could be reflected in a number of different ways. I mean, you think about, I mean, the value of, if you think about prudence is a value, right? But it gets expressed at prudence about what, right? So, so it could actually be in a number of different areas. And I think because I think you're continuing to have some of those conversations, is that it can actually be reflected in a number of different policies. So we're going to go on to policy sizes. Now we say this is easy. It's conceptually so simple, right? It's things you want to write policies so that the things that matter most are never at the mercy of things which matter least. You don't start at the lowest level policy. You really start at the largest value, the biggest decision, and you work your way in successive levels of detail until you're satisfied that you have said everything that you need to say about something. Not everything you can say, because you can in fact write policies to vary levels of detail wherein the CEO's choice is limited to a single course of action, right? And I always say, like, why would you go out and try and find, an experienced and competent, CEO if you're only going to give them a choice of one thing, right? One road to travel. So what you want to be able to do is to set it in sizes to say, like, yeah, we've said enough. We think that covers everything that we want to say. So conceptually easy. Putting it into practice is a learning process, right? So the reason for this is it says decisions are not equal in size, right? Like saying, saying, don't do anything, imprudent, unethical, et cetera, is a very large decision. Don't allow hiring practices that are peopled with a whole bunch of people that were elected, in the last year, just lost an election. Much different level of detail, right? So imprudent, yes, but, and possibly unethical, but it's a much smaller decision. So what it enables you to do is to stay out of the details, right? If what you do is to work through those levels until such point as you're going like, yeah, that's detailed enough. We don't need to be more detailed than this in terms of setting out those boundaries. And essentially what it allows you to do, because of the way you've got 4 categories, right, which cover everything. And if you set up all of those policies in cascading sequence, essentially what you can do is you can cover, right, you have your arms around the entire organization. And you have a cascading sequence of levels, and you stop at that point where you're willing to accept any reasonable interpretation. So this just says this in another way. You can think of this as the often used analogy as a set of nesting bowls, right? That you have a large bowl, and inside that bowl fits the next level, and inside that bowl fits the next level. And you're going to keep writing policies, but this is an important part, is that the next level of policy needs to be contained within the larger policy, right? Remember, we had some of those discussions, I think, in a number of the policy discussions that we've had, whether it was about external relations that's now migrated, and saying, this fits in here, right? This is about something that we've already written, and it's just more detail about it, right? Yeah.
In terms of the nested, we often, when we have any, like I don't know what you call it, the top level, like 2.1.
Yeah.
It's then we have sub policies under that. It's we attach at the end of 2.1 without limiting the scope of the preceding.
Yeah.
Blah, blah, blah. But we
Yeah.
haven't tended to do that when we go down to a 3rd level.
Yeah, you don't really need to do that, because what you're doing, right, is so if you've got this level, this payment here, what you're saying is that we're writing this policy, and without kind of limiting the scope of this, we're also saying this. And part of that, I think it'll come up, is that what you end up with is that there will be, unless you write deep policy so detailed, right, you'll never have a place that isn't further interpreted. So what the board is doing is saying, we've said, don't do anything imprudent and unethical or unlawful. You could stop there. I've never met a board that stops there saying, yeah, no, we actually want to say something about what would be unethical and imprudent with respect to treatment of staff or treatment of the traveling public or financial conditions and activities. We want to say something more about that. And so we'll say something large in that area, like don't create situations that lead to fiscal jeopardy, right? I don't have policies memorized, so and in saying, yeah, we might want to say a bit more, right? We might want to say a little bit more about specific activities that we are concerned about with respect to the risking of fiscal jeopardy. But what you say when you're saying without limiting the foregoing, right? What that means is that this policy is large enough that it can be, you can use it to come back and interpret. So what we say is there's always sort of a safety spot. So if something comes up, right, with respect to any area of operational activities, is probably the most common example, that isn't really specifically addressed. So it's something new, right? So say it's the use of AI for something or another. You're going, we haven't really addressed that. But what the CO can do is go back and say, okay, is this unethical, right? Or imprudent or unlawful, right? And said, yeah, no, it's not. Now I might want to, you might want to vet some of that, but in fact, you can go back to that higher level and say, did we say anything about this? Well, not specifically, but we did say, don't do anything that's unethical, imprudent, or unlawful.
I think it's more like, so I was just looking at like, I just opened up
pick one.
293.
Okay.
On page 14 of the policy.
Yep.
So 2.9
Mhm.
ends with without limiting the scope of the foregoing.
Yeah.
But 2.93 doesn't, yet it has more sub-policies. Is there, so I think what I'm wondering, we've often gotten, and I think this is particularly an issue with the global executive limitation, that do the sub-policies define the above policies, or is that without limiting the foregoing, just accepted throughout all of these?
Yeah.
Or is it only true for like
No.
293 or 29 to 293, but not 293 to 293?
No, so what 291 and 2916 and 291, yeah, 291, why are these on? Okay. 291, 2, et cetera, are a further, if you will, a further interpretation of 2.9 of 2.9, but they're not a full interpretation. All right? They're just saying, we're going to talk about, so 2.91 is probably a further interpretation of do not let the board be uninformed, all right? Some of it will be allowing the board to be unprepared to be responsive is again, sort of a further interpretation of being uninformed, all right? And then each of these ones below it, right? So you don't have to say, so this, you always go up, I don't know how to describe it. So you don't need to repeat that, right? Because what you're saying is here's withhold or impede, 2.91. We're actually going to further specify what that means, all right?
But
And then we can stop.
so even still, so even though there is a 2911,
Mhm.
I guess it's more in the reports, when we get to
Yes,
the upper
okay,
level things,
yes,
to
yeah,
say, I'll report compliance with this when all of the sub policies are in compliance.
Right.
But that's
Yeah.
kind of not
So,
always the case.
yeah.
That phrasing
Okay.
implies that there are things outside the scope of the sub policies.
Yeah. There might be, so just, let me just.
Was I get that?
Yeah, so if you're having, so let's just say this is 2. You see this? And you have 2.9.1, 2.9.2, and 2.9.3. This is, we're going to cover that. And then you're saying, we're going to say some more about this. And some more about this. But we may not cover all of this, right? So in that monitoring report, what you're saying is that in this instance, right, is with these things, the board has fully interpreted this in its further detailed policies. And if there's compliance here, then this will be compliant, right? It's the same with this, is the board has fully interpreted all of this, except for this, right? So you might see in the monitoring report, compliance will be, there will be compliance, or there's compliance with all of these policies, right, which means there's compliance with all of those. And additionally this, because the board hasn't further interpreted this part.
So even though going from 291 to 2911, we haven't restated without limiting the scope of further,
Yeah.
the foregoing, it's still implied.
Yeah.
So would you mind maybe going back one slide?
Sure. Maybe. It's not as easy to think.
Go backwards.
Oh, thank you. That's right. Thank you for that. You see, technology is my best thing.
No, that's okay. So that last statement where word is willing to accept any reasonable interpretation of those words, I think that is really the root of what we really have to figure out. And I would even to put any, I would even put bold in all caps.
Yeah,
Because I
thank you.
think that
Yes,
in conjunction with reasonable is where
Yeah.
we trip over a lot of stuff. Because in reality, in my view, those two are kind of decoupled from each other.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
in my view, Matt can have a reasonable interpretation. And
Yeah.
I think we can decide is that acceptable or do we actually ding him on that?
Yeah.
Because if it's any reasonable interpretation, then we have to kind of accept it and say, well, he actually has achieved what he thought he was supposed to do. And then that's when kind of drill into these more simple words.
Yeah, and that is, you're right, that any reasonable interpretation should be capitalized and bolded, because it does mean any reasonable interpretation, not one that you think would be better, right? Or one that you would write if you were the CEO. It really is any reasonable. And I think we've gone through I'm not gonna repeat this, we've gone through reasonable or not, right? Is there a metric, is it justified, is there a standard, is it just, is there a rationale that's defensible, right? And if there is, then it's reasonable, right? Yeah. Or it might say, it's reasonable for the words that we wrote. And I think this is where we've got caught up sometimes. It's reasonable for what we wrote, but what we wrote isn't maybe what we mean now.
Yeah.
And then that signals is like, oh, Madam Chair, could we please note that we need to go back and revisit this policy statement? Okay. Moving on to the nesting holes. This just says the same thing in pictures. So policy size is really similar, right? Is that if you look at that executive limitation, which is kind of just what I've drawn on the board, right? Is that this don't do anything unethical, imprudent, unlawful. We're going to further interpret some of that, but there will be, some parts of this. Oh, that's interesting. It goes over here, but it won't go on the screen. Okay, there'll be some parts of that where that sort of tooth is missing, if you will, that haven't been further interpreted. And often with this EL, I'm trying to think, it's often the unlawful part, right? Which is that we've interpreted imprudent and unethical pretty much everywhere, but often unlawful isn't interpreted. And I think we've had this conversation a bit in the last time we monitored the General Executive Consortium, saying, yeah, we maybe need to rethink how we monitor that, because that is the piece that is often, you need to think through how we're actually going to monitor that we're not doing anything unlawful. And in this instance, it's pretty complicated, or it's pretty complex and complicated. So. Okay. Yes, okay, there we go. The missing tooth. So the benefit of this structure, right, the categories and the sizes, means that you can govern all that you should. So we say you can govern all that you should, not all that you could, right? Because if you govern all that you could, you end up writing very detailed policies. It enables empowerment and accountability, right? So it enables you to delegate safely, if you will, right? Because when you've got, I think I was talking with someone, you have the checks and balances in place, and you have a process of regularly, rigorously, systematically monitoring that in fact there's compliance with policies and that there's achievement events. And so there is safety in delegation. It isn't just as sometimes is said about policy, it gives the CEO too much power. And I'm like, not in any board I'm working with, it's usually pretty demanding in terms of the kind of accountability that's required. And so it does also enable that empowerment, because what you say what you want to say, right? You say what you mean to say, you say what should be expected of the organization, and the CEO doesn't have to mind read, right? So I think this is what the board meant when it was talking about this, but I'm not sure. So, we come back to the table, we go back and forth, and it's a very inefficient process when you're trying to mind read, or it leads to problems, right? So, and enables you to keep policies current because the volume is such, right? This is not a very large policy manual by contrast to many organizations. And so you're able to regularly review them because there aren't that many policies. And so they're always current. It's not the policy we set back in 2001. I don't even remember that. We have a policy about that. Yeah, so. Okay. This is the fun. We're gonna play practicing with policy sizes. So we're just let's come over here. So we're gonna follow along. You got your copy, Mike and Susan? Okay, it's coming to you. So we're gonna just do them together and go through sort of go through each one. And what I suggest as a way of figuring this out is decide which of these is the biggest policy statement and which is the smallest, and then the other one will just fall in between, right? So if you think about the first one, right? Oh, that's an interesting instruction, isn't it? There's 3 statements. And determine their order from largest to smallest. From 1 to, that's not correct. So it means 1, 2, 3, but I saw that before, but to change it. So which of these do you think is the largest?
C is the largest. Oh, are we saying this out loud or?
Yeah, you can say it out loud. Yeah,
I think C is the largest.
I think B.
I say B.
You're saying B? Yeah. And that's, part of that is saying, use the workplace environment, right? Which is pretty large. You don't want anything that's unfair, disrespectful, unsafe, or disorganized, or otherwise interferes with the employee's ability to do jobs. You could stop there, right? But often what we'll say is that we want to say something about what would be unfair. All right, we want to be clearer about that. And what we're saying is that we're not going to allow staff to be without current enforced documentation that clarifies expectations and working conditions, provides for effective handling of grievances, and protects against wrongful conditions. And then we're going to say something else about, we want to be clear about what we mean by wrongful conditions, right? And that we won't allow permit staff to be without adequate protection from harassment.
So I like to play opposite.
Okay,
Which I think is
because.
hilarious,
Hmm,
because I feel like A is pretty specific, right? It's basically saying like, it's current enforced documentation that clarifies expectations of working conditions. To me, that's very much like smallest in granularity, whereas adequate protection from harassment, to me, harassment is pretty broad. Right? What kind of harassment is that?
But you could actually make this more detailed. All right, you could make C more detailed if you chose to, and I have seen organizations that make that actually more specific. But it is a further interpretation of what would be, wait a second, here we are. What would be wrongful conditions, right?
So since it's, you're saying that since it's just one of the several conditions laid out in A, that it would be more
It's
narrow,
narrower, yeah.
even though it's in some ways sort of less detailed than A.
Yeah, although A seems detailed, but it covers a lot of stuff. If you think about enforced documentation that clarifies expectations and working conditions, it's pretty large, right? Provides for effective handling of grievances and protects against wrongful conditions, which is typically the second highest. Listen, usually kind of a second level policy.
I'm gonna be terrible at this.
I know. Okay, moving right along. That's why I'm saying it's conceptually very easy. Practically. Got it, yes.
I gotta
Not
say,
a guess. Okay.
I guess 1, 2, 3.
Nice.
And you'd be right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this one, permit planning that allocates resources, that risk jeopardy or isn't aligned, is pretty large, right? And that's going to be the largest sort of planning. And then not operating. What we mean by planning is actually a documented multi-year strategy that can be reasonably expected to achieve ends. Right? And yes, and also in that planning, you need to be able to, you can't just do the plan without actually justifying or explaining the assumptions that underlie that plan. So again, anything else we're good with? All right, so here's another one. So this is actually a board, what do we call them, CEO delegation, or board management delegation. Yeah, board management delegation.
213.
213. So a trick is, if you looked at this and said, if this was one, right, it says it's all about ends, right? What would you do with this one that talks about organizational situations to be avoided? So it doesn't hold this statement, right? Because it's only about ends. That makes sense?
It does when you say it like that.
Yeah. That's what I'm saying, is it's reading it and saying like, oh yeah, okay, this doesn't, it doesn't hold that. So this is another one of these. Oh, 1, 2, 3. All right. A couple more. So this is a governance process policy.
On 312.
Let's see. Yep. So just what, when you think about
It was rich on that too.
So when you were thinking that through, Jesse, what was the rationale?
Well, the B just kind of defines really the existence of a chair position and very
Yeah.
broadly what it does. And then I saw A as a subset of C.
Yeah.
C says that the chair's job is to they behave consistency with its own rules, and A kind of helps clarify what some of those rules are.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's a good way when you look at them, of saying like, okay, which one fits in here, right? And then this is an ends policy, clearly not transportation system ends, but so 3, 1, 2. Okay. Yeah. So B is a bit of a dead giveaway because it's got all 3 of those elements in it, right? It's got students have a foundation of knowledge for successful life at a cost that justifies expenditure.
This
Or
is the highest,
expenditure of public resources, sorry.
that last sentence, this is the highest priority, like, it seems weird to.
Okay, yeah, so sometimes another way of thinking about what something is worth to an organization is by specifying priority. Okay, so you can say this, it's a cost that justifies public resources, but this is the highest of all the other things. This is a higher priority than others. So if in thinking about how you're going to allocate resources, the expectation is that there would be more effort, time, maybe not just monetary resources that are allocated to this particular end. So that is, it's not a common use, all right, because it shifts over time in the board, sometimes, we'll rethink that, but sometimes there will be organizations that say, this is clearly our first priority. And the other things are a lesser priority, they're important, but reading, writing, and arithmetic are the highest priority.
Just noting this is something that we don't specify, but something that we've talked about.
Yeah, it's.
Prioritizing the ends. I didn't realize that it was, I mean, maybe not common, but precedent for boards to actually specify the priority of their ends.
Yeah, you could, like I said, it's another way of expressing at what worth. So yes, they will, and I have seen some where they're all prioritized, or just the top two are prioritized, or the top one is prioritized. Alrighty, so I'm just gonna give you a couple of tools that I find helpful when I write policies. Is when an idea comes up, and this is an example that clearly also comes from another situation. But it's trying to find, in this instance, finding the hidden end, right? And so it's a very common statement with national organizations is we want to be the voice for the profession or the voice of the field or the voice of, et cetera. And we're like, why would you want it? Like, you don't exist to be the voice. So let's think about why is that? So, well, it's what our members want us to be. Well, why? Right? So you just keep asking why. It says, well, they want decision makers to understand the issues related to this area. Well, why? Well, because they need supportive public policy. Okay, but why? Right? Well, because they want the public to be aware of the value of their work with children. Right? Okay, but why? Right? Well, because we want parents and guardians to seek licensed childcare as a first choice. Okay, now we're at the end, right? Now we're knowing here's the reason that you exist as an organization is that parents and guardians seek licensed childcare as a first choice. And all of these other things are actually just means, right? So it's when you're saying, well, we should be doing this, you want to start by saying, why, right? Why are we doing that? So that you get to the place of saying, the reason that we exist as an organization is so that this, right? Not so that we're the national voice. I was like, who cares, right? It's like The Voice is a TV show. It's not an end.
I don't know if you shouldn't stop at 4. So it seems like 4 is sort of an important value that could be an end,
Yeah.
it seems.
Yeah.
So 5 seems
So you
like a
could,
good number.
you
but-
could do this, right? So you could do this, right? And say, this is why we exist, all right? And you might say, as a further interpretation of this, parents and guardians seek licensed childcare as a first choice. Some a next level end might be members of the public, right, are aware of the value of, licensed childcare, right? And another end may in fact be so this might be the global, the highest level end at number 5. You work back, you might want to say is that they need supportive public policy. Okay. They want decision makers to understand the issues. That actually you could interpret that as an end where you've got decision makers have, evidence or have convincing evidence of the value of licensing childcare, for example. So you could, in doing that, right, go back and go like, yeah, a couple of these are also ends, right? However, you want to keep asking why until there's no answer, right? So that when you get to this 5th why, what you're saying is why? Well, because that's why we exist, right? That's
You
what we're
could
meant
have
to do.
another one though, which is to support the financial well-being of our members. So
That's a means. Typically. Supporting the financial well, let's just think about this. You could, right, in a member association, so something that's often common, they feel like they're different organizations, might be that conditions are favorable for business success of members.
yeah,
Okay. Yeah, you could probably tease that out. Yeah. It just depends on the kind of organization that it is, right? So sometimes if it's an advocacy organization or it's a trade organization or it's a professional organization, you are concerned about creating conditions that are favorable to the business success of owners. And ultimately, their end might be, parents and guardians seek licensed childcare as a first choice. That might be actually a way that you actually create a condition that's favorable to business success.
So it really depends on the organization.
Depends on the organization, and this is a very, right, a very simple example, right? So ends conversations are usually more like a day long, so just in terms of setting them up. But it's just to give you an idea, you can go back and trace until you get to the why of why you exist. And then you're right, there are some clues in there of, that's actually helpful because I hadn't thought about that, but yeah. Okay, so that's just one example of a tool. Another one that I sometimes use, and this is more, if you will, in just a starting out point, right, is to thinking about using that. Has anyone ever used logic models? They used to be all the rage at one point in time. You're smiling like you've seen these.
We make our students use them.
Yes, okay. So what you have is, in logic model, you have activities, which are largely, here's all the stuff we do. As a result of those activities, they produce kind of short-term outputs, right? It's all logic model language. Outputs combine to produce some medium-term outcomes. And those combine to produce a long-term outcome. So you could think about this. Sometimes it's helpful if you were just saying, okay, we're going to start writing ends all over again, right? And we're just going to write down everything that we think that the that the ride should actually produce or be about, or what difference it should make in the area. These are saying, okay, we'll write all those up, and then you might start saying, okay, which of these are activities, which of them are kind of outputs, etc., and what's ultimately kind of our global end, right, or our highest level end. So I'm going to give you an example, which was just kind of fun because Wikipedia claimed it had a policy governance board and it had ends. And so I looked at them and went like, that's interesting. And so they had, but they didn't have ends. They had a whole bunch of activities. So they said, here's all the kind of activities we want to do, right? We're going to build an essential infrastructure and ensure donors, and we have policy and we have widespread promotion. You'll recognize those as means, right? Because the subject of the sentence here is Wikipedia. And those things combine to produce something. So you just pretend you're the board of Wikipedia, right? You put that up and go like, yeah, okay, that would actually, projects would be known. People around the world would be empowered to collect and develop content. And that might produce a medium-term outcome, which is we have the largest and best quality repository of educational content in the world. We have a high level of public and institutional awareness. And ultimately, this might be they didn't write this, but everybody in the world has free access to neutral, license-free educational content in their own language in perpetuity, right? Let's see, that's why we exist, right? And so these two levels might also be lower level ends, and so might these, right? If you were constructing ends, that's kind of how you do that. But it helps if you're just, like I said, if you start with a blank page and kind of go, okay, so this is an activity. What would happen if we did this, right? And what would happen if we did this? And what would happen if, well, this would happen. And that's really ultimately what we want to make a difference in the world. Yeah.
So that is very linear and very logical.
Yeah.
Brains are not linear and logical. We think of things here and there, or someone else will spark an idea and it'll come down here. How do you wrangle those thought ideas into this logical process?
Yeah, I probably use the why much more than I use this. All right, like I might use this if we were going to do ends and we were going to redevelop ends, and like to say, let's just put thousands of post-its all over the wall. We did that already. But let's just put all the post-its over the wall, and then let's try and decide which of these are activities here. Oh yeah, okay, these are. And so which of these produce what? Well, we've got some things that we've already said. So I wouldn't use this all that often, but it still does give you rise to, is this an activity that we should be doing? And why would we be doing that activity? So you end up kind of going back to the whys, but the whys is really helpful. I mean, I think the other piece of this, where are we here? Is that you've got this in the policy, right? 3.0101, which is that what's the nature of the issue, right? Is the issue actually within the scope of the agency? What's the value that drives this concern? So why do we care about this, right? What are we worried about? What difference will this make, right, to the traveling public? And then whose issue is this? Right. So I think those are good guidelines. I mean, if all you do is stop and go like, is this our issue and why do we care? Right? What is this about? But that's actually a good way to get started. Is just to do let's do a stop and check here. Right? Oh, there we go. So we were going to take, so here's what we're doing next. So I'll just tell you what we're doing next. And then I was going to suggest if you want to take a quick break, we can do that. Is we're going to work in 3 groups. We're going to, which I've pre-assigned, but we've reorganized because conditions changed. And then we're going to really look at, here's a policy issue that we might look at. Although I assigned the policy issues, I'm going to give you the choice. You can work with any that you want to, or you can say, no, I'd like us to talk about this, okay? Use sort of the checklist to guide your conversation. Experiment if you want with using the 5 whys. You do not need to come up with a final policy suggestion, right? This is not, we're not writing policy, we're practicing writing policy, right? You might come up with something that you think you want to carry forward, all right? But it doesn't need to be perfect. It could be just messy. That's okay. And then we'll come back and we'll look at sort of the outcomes of that conversation and talk about that and to see how that's going, where you went into, where you got yourself kind of turned around, and or what do we need to do going forward. Okay, and so that's kind of we're going to spend most of our time doing that, those 2 things. And then we can talk about, what's next? What else do we need to do? And you want to work on what other resources can I help you work through? That sound okay? Okay.
Which is the policy checklist?
Oh, you don't have those yet. Yes. It's like, yeah, we're going to take a break. So why don't we come back at like 10:02? Is that good?
Yeah.
10:02?
All right, so housekeeping items, the restrooms are just around this wood panel wall on the opposite side. Feel free to wander through the building, stretch your legs. If you go in the garage, please have care not to get run over by a bus. There you go.
So don't, because you can't get back in. You can't get in
Yeah.
the car.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, don't wander around the bus.
Don't go that far.
Just look through the window.
You might still, you want to give it a shot. I've actually, I don't know.
Oh, that's a good question. I still have mine as well. Mine worked in the Lake Transit Center. I had a meeting.
As
there
board
once.
members, you should have or will get access cards with your picture.
I may have actually finally taken it.
And there are treats. Most of you have found the treats already, so.
And yes, so.
Rose, we may need to reconfigure our small groups.
Yes, I already did that.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, as I was looking and going like, okay, Monica's, it's not Monica anymore. It's no Monica. And Susan is online.
Correct.
And so, yeah, so what I did is I went, Mike, Susan, see me. So see me, you get to work in this room with Mike and Susan, if that's okay. And then Chris, Kathleen, Kyra, just like that. And then Jesse, Rich, and Liz.
So we're coming back here at
10-2.
10-2.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, I was going like, yes, finally. Finally, my mom is taking me on. Yes, my dog is going like, really? Did we have to work all this time? Could we not have gone out? Or she's a Jack Russell, so she'll just come and she'll go. No.
That's adorable.
Yeah, it's pretty funny. It's like, hello, I'm here.
Last number you talking about?
539? 593? It was one of the 500s.
Did you try your card yet, Jesse?
I realized I don't actually have a look.
Oh.
After
Well, I
like 3 or
appreciate
4 years of COVID, I finally decided to take it off.
Oh, there you go.
Is it warm enough in here or cold or? Fine for me. Okay.
Yeah.
I'll open the window again. I was like,
Freeze.
I made coffee just to like warm me.
Oh,
Are we allowed to open the blind? Or is that too distracting? for us? Just not looking at the bright
Hmm.
reflective cars.
Parking lot. Yeah. Yeah, parking lot. Close them for distraction because it literally feels like they're on fire.
Oh, yeah, with the
With
sun.
the sun.
Yeah,
I won't complain, but
yeah. Well, I gotta get my face tan, so. Hey Tara, how's the new role going?
it's good.
Nice.
Working with students is new to me.
Mhm.
So I feel very.
Maybe I'll go to the wash.
Well, you're not, you know what it's, oh my gosh. So the place just got too nuts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was more than I was by
'Cause you-
myself.
Oh.
I was the only person in my group in Ann Arbor, actually in Southeast Michigan.
from the University of Michigan to Triple A.
Like and Susan are back.
Do they get paid every time twice? Wow.
Well, I mean, I guess I don't know if it's that, the last time I asked,
Yeah, okay,
Okay, never met face to
okay.
face, but-
Nice.
Good to make the connection.
Yeah, I work in the
that's the kind of thing
office.
that gets me wondering about, would I
I
do
work
that?
with Missy when she was at school.
Okay.
Is that something, is that like an
Great.
argument for?
And,
Oh,
We got Mike and Susan to come
Mike
back.
and Susan, you're back yet?
Come back. Please come back.
what do you guys think of our little owl? Our little,
I love
that's
this.
great.
yeah.
The wise
Yeah, I want one of these.
It's an interesting piece of technology. I encountered it in 2019.
Seem like much.
When the pandemic landed, I'm like, we'll buy one. We're gonna
It
do it.
kind of feels like.
Then we didn't end up using it for like a year. So
Yeah.
when Zoom came in and it's, worked better. But getting our money's worth.
It's
out of it.
nice for the multi.
Yeah, no, it works really well.
That's probably one of the things
It
about.
works really well. I know, I think I want to get one of those. You keep doing it more and more, kind of
I
mixed,
think about this.
Yeah.
like setting stuff, so, okay.
The new.
So here's the task. It's is on this sheet, all right, on this staple sheet here, is you have just some guidelines, all right? So in addition to kind of the tools that we talked about that are on the policies, is just some guidelines we're thinking about for all policies, right? For executive limitations, for ends, all right? And the reason for that is just to give you some, you can go back and look at that in your groups if you choose to. And then what we're going to do is in 3 small groups. So Susan and Mike are gonna work with Celia in this room. We're going to send, wait a second, where did my group go here? We've got Chris and Kathleen and Kyra, and we'll move you into Matt's office. And then Jesse and Rich and Liz will work in a secret area that Sam's going to take you to.
We're going to the garage.
Yeah, we didn't want to say that. Okay, you're going to the garage. Okay. So your task as a group, originally I'd sort of assigned policy discussion areas. So there's 5 policy discussion areas. Choose the one that kind of speaks to you, okay? So some of them come from, you'll notice some of them come from more recent discussions, which is around, the facilities, vehicles and services, and how would you include bus stops in that, right? And how would you, so there's been some discussion around that policy. So it's kind of playing in that area and thinking about how might we shift that so that it encompasses things that are really important to us, right? The values of, if we're concerned about that, why are we concerned? How might we address that in those policies? This second one is a communication support to the board, which actually came out of Matt's most recent monitoring report, which is we really need to rethink this. It's not numbered 1, but it just, that's how the document decided to number itself. But it is the one where it's specific about, here's all of the specific incidental information that we want to see. And there's quite a long list, and I think it's useful to say, really, do we need to do
More
more?
content than I think I missed it.
Oh, sorry.
We need a few more copies.
Oh,
So the table.
I don't.
oh, I think Susan has all of,
Is this?
yeah, Susan kept all of them.
No, sorry.
It's not a problem. Okay. And then there are a couple of ends policies areas, right? So one of them kind of comes back to the one that precipitated a fairly long conversation about monitoring, right? Which is the equitable access to public transportation. So I thought that might be a kind of a juicy topic to get into. There is an ends policy, and I've called these not so much 5 is not, it's crazy, but 4 is just kind of, it's an ends policy that at the time of writing this, there was a strength of wanting to have something about passengers are highly satisfied. I'm not convinced it's an end, so I'm just putting it out there. I think it's useful to kind of go back and revisit it and go like, you know, is this an end? Is this an executive limitation? What are we worried about here? What's our concern in this topic area? So that would be kind of the subject of that conversation. And then I just put in equity because it seemed like a good idea. Okay, so take your pick. It's okay if you're all working on the same area. I don't think that matters. This really is designed to be practice, right? And I'll kind of float between the groups or among the groups. I think, so I'm going to suggest we take 30 minutes, all right? I think that will be ample enough to get tied up in enough knots. Yeah, and just so we've got some, you know, we've got a goodly amount of time to talk about them as a whole. And then we've got a bit of time to just kind of tie things up and think about what might be next, what's a reasonable next step. Okay, so
who's heading to mine office? Is Kathleen, Kyra?
Kathleen, Kyra, and Chris.
All right. They will be escorted to an undisclosed location.
That's
We're answering these questions in
No.
regards to this policy.
They're just guidelines
Okay.
for you,
I'm
okay?
a little
So,
confused about
yeah, sorry, I probably had more data than you needed, but it was just saying,
it. I also
Okay.
didn't have the paper.
oh,
when we
okay.
started.
All right, so it's just saying, if you're, for any policy, right, what you're really concerned about is, you know, what's the purpose of this? And do we need to talk about it? Should we speak about this as a board or not?
Mhm.
Right, that's probably the big question. Executive limitations, I'm thinking what you really want to think about is, if you're thinking about writing an executive limitation, use these questions and come back to them, right?
Mhm.
And then end statement, it's really, I'm always about, is this an end,
Mhm.
right? Is this really an end? Does it really talk about a positive benefit or a change or the impact that the service should have? And is it, I think this is often a really important thing, is it something we can reasonably hold the CEO accountable to make happen?
Mhm.
All right, so I always use world peace as an example. Like, yeah, that might be a laudable end, but I'm not sure you could hold,
Mhm.
you know, or even environmental sustainability, which is, you know, a topic near and dear to everybody's hearts. Is I'm not sure you can hold the CEO accountable for achieving environmental sustainability in the area, right? But there are some aspects of that that you
Yeah.
might be able to hold.
Yeah.
The CEO accountable for.
So are
So
we
it's
just,
figuring that out.
and are we
So
just
just pick
digging
an
into
area.
this
Just-
policy discussion number one?
Yeah,
Is that what we're
Pick,
digging
you
into?
can pick any of them. So I think as a group, just figure out which area you wanna kind of dig into and talk about and say.
Did you want to use the big pad to write it?
I don't know about it. Oh, no.
It's up to you.
no,
Okay.
so-
I didn't know. I'll leave you all to do.
All right,
a
Susan
good
and
idea.
Mike, it's us.
Okay, I'm glad you understand it.
Well,
I think we're at a
That's
little bit
much
of
better.
disadvantage. We can't hear everything that's going on. Plus, we don't have the handouts, except I'm trying to scroll back and forth on the screen with them.
Okay.
A little hard to put them all together. So Simi, I think we can let you take the lead on this.
Yes,
Yeah, just pick
absolutely.
one of them.
Okay, well. Yep, I'll represent us valiantly, we'll try.
Good.
I guess we can start, there's policy discussion number one, treatment of the traveling public. It is an executive limitation that says the CEO shall not provide facilities, vehicles, or services that are not reasonably accessible to potential riders regardless of mobility limitations. And then B is shall not allow anyone, including people who have disabilities or seniors, to be discriminated against with respect to the AAATA's services. And I asked for clarification a couple times, and I'm still a little confused. But I think we're taking those policies and just sort of digging into them based on the questions we have laid
Okay.
out on the front of this policy document.
And of course, this is a policy that we discussed and had some confusion at board meetings.
Yes.
One that Jesse had a particular amount of discussion about, as I recall.
Right.
Yeah, specific to definitions, what is a facility? So is a bus stop a facility?
Yeah.
And wasn't there?
That may have been before I joined the board.
Yeah,
It was a very long discussion about bus stops.
Well, I think I think that's been a conversation that happened before and then again after I've joined the board, because I know I've been
Yeah.
party to one or two, but I think there was also, I remember I had asked a question to Matt once before because I was confused. I thought there was a contradiction between this statement and the fact that we're ADA compliant.
right.
But I think that's actually not the case because it was, there are certain bus stops that aren't ADA compliant, but the process of trying to get them to compliance would then, I don't know, somehow contradict this policy, I think, but.
But really, when you're talking about that, aren't we really talking about the interpretation and not the policy itself?
I think you're right, because it's about how you interpret.
So yeah, I presume we are just supposed to discuss the policy right now, rather
I
than.
think you
policy.
are right, Mike. I think
Yeah.
you are, Mike, right, Mike.
So Mike, were you here when that policy was written? And if so, the question
Yeah,
I have
I'm
is,
sure I was, because I was here before the policy governance.
all right,
came
well,
into effect.
then
So
you're
I can't
perfect.
deny it. No, I can't deny it.
Because the
And-
title, this is a confusing one for me. The title is expansive, but the content is very, very focused on mobility and making the service available to people who have potentially some mobility limitations. But the topic is the treatment of the traveling public. So it would suggest to me this involves rudeness, this would involve welcoming, this would involve making sure information is available, that kind of thing. But again, the title is so large, but the topics that are shared are only about mobility limitations. And that leads to the question, was that done purposely, and is the title mismatched to the topic? Does that make sense?
I see your point, Susan, but I sure can't answer your question.
Okay, well, and I don't want to create a muddle, and I certainly don't
Yeah.
want to create work, but it seems like this isn't addressing the treatment of the traveling public. This is, the AAATA provides service to people, regardless of mobility, ability, or limitations. I mean, I think that would be a more apt topic or title to the
Susan,
content.
Are you referring to the
actually,
two bullet
Susan,
points that are here, or the entire policy treatment of the
Yeah,
travel?
in fact, Susan, I just went back to look at, this is policy 2.1,
Yeah,
which has a bunch of sub-policies that are. not
okay,
refined.
all right. Okay, so I'm just looking at the handout.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Okay,
those are the first two of about 7 or 8.
okay.
so yeah, there's a lot of them. Goes down to 2.1.6.1.
Okay, let me get out of the handout then to the, but rather than bog us down, back to our assignment.
I guess we're supposed to be just addressing A and B here. Is that right?
I asked, Rose was very, left a lot of interpretation up to us in terms of even which policies we want to talk about. So
Okay,
if we get bogged down in this one, I say maybe we move on to the second. But
Sure.
there are Yeah, on the first page of the packet, there are a number of questions specifically for ends or executive limitations. So I wonder if we just want to run through those in relation to these policies, maybe
Okay.
as a starting point.
Yeah, and also to what's on the sheet, it's, you missed the big picture by not having with respect to the agency operations, blah, 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 which leads into, it's really just a small slice of the entire policy.
Right.
So Seema, you're suggesting we just go in general back to the sheet that says for executive limitation policies. Is
Yep.
there
You know, I
significant-
thought run through those.
Okay.
And if we only have how many minutes until when?
We've got I think we've got about 20 minutes. So,
Okay.
and Rose will come back in at some point and we can, talk through
Okay.
and see if we're on the right track. I guess I'm happy to read through these, one by one, and if you've got things to add, just jump in. The
Yep.
first one is for executive limitation policies. Is this an area of significant risk that has been identified since this policy was written?
Yeah. And before we try to answer that, are we wanting to just focus on the two sub policies here, or the broader one, or the more details that aren't even there?
I was thinking the two that are here, but maybe.
Yeah, that's probably a good place to start.
That's probably good. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I think this area has not come up as a significant risk in terms of mobility limitations since the policy was written. It's been a discussion sort of ongoing in my mind. So.
Yeah, and I think the only time, at least in my 2 years, was the discussion around TheRide and the service for people with the shared taxi service paying for it at a certain level. What was required as ADA and what was provided as an amenity. And I think it was just a clarification that we did as a board. So I don't think it was a risk so much as a work that we did to clarify.
Mm-hmm. And I guess we might as well think about both A and B policies here.
Yeah.
Instead of going through them twice, but I think that sort of applies to both. So I would say this has not really been an area of significant risk.
No.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Yep.
Moving on, have monitoring reports or other circumstances created a question or concern about the adequacy of the policy?
Yeah, I think what was said earlier, clarification about what is a facility and is a bus stop facility. And if so, where does the agency's responsibility end and a municipality's responsibility begin? The bus stop and its an ability to reach it if there's no sidewalk, well, is the agency responsible for installing sidewalks throughout its district so that people could get to any bus stop at any time? And I think that's been left not really addressed. I definitely heard Jesse's question, and I'm not sure we've quite settled it.
In fact, I think Jesse, at Rose's prompting, in terms of saying that he was really addressing the interpretation, and that if he really wants it changed, in fact, it would be more appropriate to try to put it into the policy rather than into the interpretation. And then we had a debate about whether it should go into the policy or not.
Mm-hmm.
I think that was voted down.
Mm-hmm.
But there was some, so.
That was the meeting in the basement of the library a few months ago?
No, before then.
Okay.
Wasn't it, Susan?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think so.
Okay. So if it is a question of interpretation, isn't it still, unless the interpretation is deemed unreasonable, because we're supposed to accept any reasonable interpretation. So it is about refining the policy so that that interpretation is no longer reasonable.
Yeah, and I think what we're talking about is really the second one under this list, of executive policy, executive limitations policies. Now, the monitoring board or other circumstances create a question or concern about the adequacy of the policy.
Mhm.
I think the answer is yes on that one specific issue. It was
Yeah,
pretty
right.
contentious. I think that's maybe all we need to say there. We
Yeah.
certainly don't want to get into a debate on that.
Yeah.
Do you think that applies to B as well as A? That's allow anyone, including people with disabilities or seniors, to be discriminated against with respect to AATA's services.
I don't think so. I think it's just A.
Okay.
Because
Yeah.
it's we specifically facilities, and Jesse was adamant that that should include bus stops.
Yeah, I just didn't know because it mentioned people with disabilities to be discriminated against. So does the, is that applicable?
I don't think that came up in the discussion, did it, Susan?
No, and I think because the agency provides an alternative solution, door-to-door service specifically, which enables some passengers to avoid using a bus stop. I think that's sort of where we left it. So that's why I don't think B would be
Okay.
a problem. Because again, there is an alternative solution.
Sounds good. Okay, the third question is, what worries or concerns does the board have in this area that may need to be incorporated within further levels of this policy? So that's sort of what we just talked about. I think, ADA compliance versus, mobility of potential riders, regardless of mobility limitations. So, so our worry or concern is that I'm just trying to put into words what our concern is.
Yeah, I
Because
don't know. Yeah, since we voted on it, I don't know that we still have worries or concerns. I think we clarified for ourselves, at least at the moment. But I think we all acknowledge that Jesse made a very good point.
Because is it about what was the outcome of the conversation, if you can remind me? It was about the interpretation of that policy, because what Matt interpreted the policy to mean something about ADA, and since we were ADA compliant, he was arguing that we were adhering to this policy, is my recollection.
That's my recollection.
My recollection, yeah.
And so the concern is ADA compliance doesn't necessarily mean that everybody with a mobility limitation can access our services. That's the concern. And it has to do with how Matt was interpreting this.
Yeah.
We talked through this. So doesn't that mean we should be able to change the policy so that Matt no longer interprets this that way?
We could go back and listen to the board meeting.
Yeah.
Remember, my recollection is that we kind of punted on that. We accepted it for then, but Matt was going to rethink the interpretation, and I think the board might be rethinking the actual policy itself. So
Mhm.
we should probably mention this, that this point affects B.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Yeah. Rather than trying to get too fine a point on it.
Yep,
Okay, so yeah, that definitely applies.
Mhm.
Okay. It says avoid policy statements that result in limits beyond what is necessary to avoid unethical and imprudent means. I don't think there's anything here that results in limits
no,
beyond that. Avoid policy statements that contain prescriptions about means that the board prefers. Executive limitations are only about limits in ethics and prudence. So I think we're good there.
yeah,
Yeah,
we
these
have-
last
we have
couple are
other
just,
policy that
yeah,
have,
these
that have
last
that.
couple are just about writing
Yeah.
what to avoid. Okay. Do we, I mean, one thing we could try to do is, jot down a new policy statement and, try to adhere to these rules, or we can, move on to some of the other ones that are in here, and talk through those.
yeah, let's go to the other ones.
Okay.
That's okay, Mike?
Yeah. All right, we can just move on to number 2, communications and support to the board. So this is, again, executive limitations. So I'm gonna try to find it.
Either that, or we could go down the list on treatment of the traveling public, the ones that are not on there.
Oh,
I guess I don't have a strong preference. either
yeah,
way.
Susan, do you have?
No, I don't. Mm-mm.
Communication or treatment? I guess, how about we go on to communication and support to the board?
Okay,
Just because that's on our sheet, so I assume other
Right.
people will be talking about that.
what policy number is that? Let me.
That's 2.9.
And it's, yeah, page 12. I pulled up the policy manual.
Yeah.
Over. Right.
Hmm. So the first thing here, the first policy that's numbered just number 1, that's
Yep.
2.9.1. Oh wait, never mind. I'm trying to figure out which policy that is. It is 2.9.1.5. Bottom of page 12.
Oh, okay. Yep, there it is. I was having a hard time finding that too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like, where is this? Okay, so that's where we're at. So what it says is the CEO shall not let the board be unaware of material internal changes, including changes in policy interpretation, significant reputational, legal, political, or financial risks, developments that have significant negative implications for the budget, threatened or pending lawsuits, relevant trends, and any other incidental information requested by the board. And then it goes into what incidental information includes. So again, we're talking about executive limitations. So back to the first question, is this an area of significant risk that has been identified since this policy was written? I don't think so.
I don't think so.
You know,
Going through the list and no, I don't think so either.
Yeah.
have monitoring reports or other circumstances created a question or concern about the adequacy of this policy?
So last year I did a very bad job. So I take it all on myself because I was still learning policy governance. But with regard to 1.8, a presentation about relevant emerging trends and technologies applicable to us and innovations trialed or introduced, I raised the concern that we had a presentation that was a PowerPoint on the nature of innovation. And some innovations, are exciting, but innovations aren't applicable from one place to the next. But we actually never got a presentation on innovations, if that makes sense. So in my own backhanded way, I was asking, is this actually meeting what we've set out that we've requested? Or is in fact this presentation on the nature of innovation, is that satisfactory to what it is we've asked for? And again, I don't think I did a very good job communicating my question about or my concern about it. So the discussion didn't go further from that night at the board meeting. But at least for me, I didn't feel that we had received what I thought the policy had set forward, but I seem to have been the only one who was somewhat taken aback by the presentation on a very vague, this is what innovation is presentation, as opposed to actual what is happening in the industry.
Mhm.
So again, the fault is my own for not being better spoken, but I don't know that we did, at least I don't think we did receive a presentation in the last period of time about innovations.
Which policy was that?
Yeah, I'm having trouble finding.
This is a
2.9.
presentation. Look at policy discussion number 2, 1.8.
Oh, okay.
Oh, I'm looking at 2.9.1.5, which specifies
Yeah,
it's the
that's
communication
right.
support to the board.
Yeah, I just didn't, where's the word innovation?
It's I. So 2.9.1.5.
Strategic.
Oh, sorry, it's H.
Or 1.8 on the screen.
It's H.
Relevant emerging trends and technologies and innovations. I see.
Yeah, and again, the fault is my own for, I knew so little about policy governance at that point. So I spoke, I think, very ineffectively, but I was raising the question about the presentation and whether it actually was sufficient to meet what we had laid out as a policy. So this is not to say there's a problem with the policy, but it's more just clarification on what is our expectation on what a annual presentation would look like.
Well, that's where I'm a little confused, because I think it is maybe changing the policy, because if Matt's interpretation was reasonable, it's one of any reasonable interpretations, then I thought the only way we can sort of change that is to make the policy more specific.
This is pretty specific.
Yeah, so this is, I thought, specific. Instead, what we received was a PowerPoint on what is the nature of innovation and how an innovation in one community isn't necessarily applicable to another. But then we saw what I thought was something that could be applicable to any industry about how there is a bell curve on innovation, where there's an idea put forward and then it's tested and then it's embraced and then that was the presentation. We didn't, and I was raising the question that day about, well, for instance, I'm hearing a lot about free fare, not that I support free fares, but that is an innovation that's being tested around the country. Is that something we could hear about? What are the impacts that other agencies are experiencing? That was a place where I think at least I wasn't sure that the presentation was matching what we had asked for. And maybe it was just my interpretation of this. I was asking for something that was too prescriptive. I was asking for specifics as opposed to a general presentation on what is innovation.
Yeah, I remember that and remember, the bell curve and, the quadrants, it was more, exactly like you said, applicable to multiple industries. Whereas this policy says relevant emerging trends and technologies with applicability to transit authority. So that's laid out pretty specifically. I don't recall if that was, it definitely wasn't the highlight of that presentation, but does it mean that when it comes time to monitor this again, that, it's a, you didn't.
Because without being prescriptive, I don't want to be prescriptive, but rather,
These are
was
prescriptive.
trying to understand
Right.
how we as a board are informed about what's happening in the larger industry.
But if we're looking at the question before us that we're supposed to answer, have the monitoring reports or other circumstances raised question or concern about the adequacy of the policy? I don't think that has to do with the adequacy of the policy.
Okay,
We're talking about the adequacy of what was presented to us.
right,
That's the adequacy.
right. That's different. You're right. You're right.
But I think this is pretty meansy, and like
Yeah.
Rose said, it gets pretty specific with what we asked for here.
Which is,
Right.
which is okay, it's okay, right? Like, because what it's saying is there is some incidental information that a board specifically wants to get, right? For any number of reasons. I mean, some of it may just be that you want to be in a position of being, sort of well-informed so that you can speak to the people that appointed you, right? And say, if people are saying, well, what's going on? And they're saying, why aren't you adapting this, et cetera. So we've talked about that, et cetera, et cetera. And so you can actually be clear that there are some specific things that you want to know, right? Just because you want to know them, that's okay. So they're all things that the board as a whole has said, we just want to know this, right? I think the reason it got flagged is because there's a lot of stuff on here. It's like, is this all still, is it all still relevant, right?
Right.
Is it all still things that you want to know? And so I'm hearing is H is, yes, it's something for sure that's important to you, Susan, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, this we want to keep, right? But I have no idea what strategic context means. but,
Yeah, that's
Like,
incidental information.
Yep.
strategic Context, that's very vague, very ambiguous.
Very vague. Yep.
And G should actually be in a different place, but it's okay. G is the personal expense report. That belongs somewhere else.
Because there's stuff.
Probably belongs in the terms of reference of the governance committee or else.
Is it back in the another piece of this where it talks about, the business report and things that the CEO is reporting to the board?
Well, the CEO is always going to have like an information report, like a report of activities or whatever the CEO's report. It's still incidental, but it's going to be his choice what's in there, right? This particular policy is simply saying, and this H, so H has a history. It's nice. H has a history because there used to be a limitation that said something like the CEO shall not allow opportunities for innovation to go unpursued. So like, what the heck does that mean? Right. So it was something like that, but it was something very bizarre.
Partnerships.
Yeah, and it was.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so, but you still want information about technology and innovation, right? And what's happening in the industry. And so he said, okay, that, and this was me saying, that's actually incidental information that you want, okay? And then, so we talked about what do you want? And so that's how we ended up with H, is it was saying this is incidental information. But this is different than just the CEO's report for the board, right, of activities. This really is saying there are some specific kinds of things that we want to have. And I'm looking at this and going, there's some things like E, I think belongs somewhere else. G probably belongs somewhere else. Yeah.
I should
D belongs somewhere else, I is curious. So I think that's hence Max's thing. It's not saying H doesn't belong there, monitor, but knowing what that is, like if it's on your annual calendar or whatever, you know, if it's the report on, you know, the annual presentation on emerging trends and technologies applicable to, et cetera, is probably part of the annual, you know, the board's annual calendar. But so that one probably stays, like I would keep that in that policy, but some of these other ones I think would be worthwhile revisiting, right?
When this is.
Or replacing, like, you know, where we put them in
Moving,
different places,
yeah.
yeah.
One of the bullet points here on executive limitations says avoid the use of do not fail to statements. Can you,
There aren't any in
we
this
say a
one.
lot of like CEO shall not, which
That's
seems like
okay.
a synonym to me, but is it the double negative?
Yeah, it's part of it is. So the rationale for that is that the original templates, right? So when Carver first introduced that, he used do not fail to all the time, all right? Shall not fail to do this, shall not fail to do that, etc. And what they discovered over time is that actually became an easy way for boards to actually just say, shall not fail to do exactly what we want, right? And so he said, okay, this isn't accomplishing, this isn't doing what it should be doing, which is really for the board to describe what would be unacceptable circumstances, what would be unacceptable to them because it's unethical or imprudent, right? And so they changed the language of that is that using, you know, permit this to happen or allow this to happen was easier, was a more disciplined way of saying what would be unacceptable to us. So it's just, you know, my goal in life is to eliminate all the shall not fail to's from the policies. But it could take my life. So it's not fatal, but it would just, they'd just be more contemporary.
I'm going to ask a question about that, if that's okay with the segue. In your, you know, so you, on your paper, prescribing versus prescribing.
Yeah.
You talk about using phrases such as shall not fail to, which
Yeah.
in most instances is really saying as you must.
Yeah.
But it didn't really give an example of what would be the alternate language. So I'm really struggling with that. Do you have a phraseology in mind, or is this?
Yeah, I often will use, and so some of the policies we've written lately, what you'll see is that there is no shall not fail to. Right. And so what you end up saying is often is that the CEO shall not allow this to happen, or shall not permit the following to happen, or something like shall not allow, I'm trying to think of this, accounts payable to go overdue without pursuit, or, you know, without aggressively pursuing them or something like that.
So it's just being word
It's
smart.
just, it's trying, yeah, it's being word smart of saying what's the unacceptable condition? All right, okay, it's unacceptable for bills to go unpaid. All right, but if, you know, that's probably not the best one, but there are a couple of where you end up saying shall not fail to do something. And it's just like, it may not start out that way, but if you use that format, if you will, it's a very slippery slope, right? It just is,
Yes.
you know, and I have seen some things like the CEO shall not fail to hold the annual meeting in a city where we do not have members. And I'm like, okay, that's a bit prescriptive, right?
Okay.
So, yeah.
I just gave the other group a 2 in the morning, so.
Perfect.
Until 2 in the morning.
Okay, no. Yes, that would be a problem. I'd be at home, we'd be doing this. Be doing this over the.
Did you put them in an area that's proprietarily?
It's the severe weather, it's the severe weather room,
Oh, okay.
severe weather
That's one of the
protection.
Challenges though about like not having the, you know, like if we were to have like a public meeting here, like after hours, like we don't lock necessarily.
Right.
We kind of do, but there are ways to, if you know your way around the building.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. Yeah, we did have a board meeting here once. And that was so challenging because I remember we didn't have the owl.
No,
We didn't have a cameraman, and then we had at least, what, 6 or 7 visitors with us. And this room got so hot and musty, and it was, because this room wasn't this, it had credenzas everywhere. It was just crazy.
I mean, that's one way to shorten a meeting.
Pardon?
It's one way to shorten a meeting.
Right.
It's hot and smelly.
Now, I didn't see smell, I think I was a little bit better about that, but.
See, this is interesting, huh? Where it's got, so in this, sorry, you might even know what I'm talking about. We're looking at 2.9 and 2.9.1.5. Item B says customer satisfaction metrics, which is interesting, right? So you're going like, okay, it's a metric. Why is it an N as well? Anyway,
Where is it?
Why is it an N?
customer satisfaction is essentially is an end. And this is, I think that's the end, that's the end that I struggle with. It's like, yeah, I'm not sure that's why you exist, but.
But then the other question we had was, don't the ends drive the limitations? So aren't the, no, not necessarily.
Not necessarily. I mean, limitations are really saying, make this happen. As long as you're operating within this corral of outside of which would be unacceptable,
Okay.
right? So they might not be, I mean, executive limitations across most organizations address almost always the same things. The treatment of a public or patients or clients or members or something, treatment of staff, financial or just planning, financial conditions and activities, asset protection, investment. So they're all essentially organizational means. And so they're very similar. I mean, they're very tailored, right? They'll be tailored to the context of in which the organization operates, but they're very common across organizations. So you can look at a set of limitations and recognize, oh, I know what those are. Ends might be something entirely different. Ends are the policies that are the most unique set of policies in an organization. The other three categories of policies can be, used. It's why we have templates for various contexts so that we can just really use those, but ends are
She's
always uniquely developed for the specific organization.
I'd like to go. I'll probably just go, like we did our own graduation.
Okay, we are all back and we have 17 minutes because I would like to take 5 minutes at the end. So as I said, the idea was not to come up with, there is no pat answer here. There's probably raised a lot of questions and I think that's useful, right? To be able to say, okay, there's some things we want to follow up on, or there's some things that we have questions about, and what's kind of our next steps with some of these. So is that fair? We can, okay. So let's just, let's take the emergency shelter room group.
Was that us?
No. Yeah, oh, yes, it is, okay.
Okay, so we dealt with treatment of the traveling public. So do you want me to just go through the list of questions?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
So what is the purpose of the policy? That was to ensure that the traveling public was not discriminated against in regards to mobility limitations or age.
Okay.
Did the board need to speak at all on this subject? We said yes, because it clarified how N 1.1 is to be achieved. It set some guardrails for that. One of them being equitable access to transportation services. Did the board address this subject in any other policy? We talked about 1.1.2, that we wondered how where people with disabilities, mobility impairments, seniors, and non-English speakers have equitable access to opportunities and destinations. We wondered, we discussed whether or not it would be possible, is 1.1.2, would it be possible to achieve 1.1.2 without, while discriminating against those very same people?
I'm not sure if it was necessary, given the way that the ends policy is written.
Since they kind of called out some of the same populations, and so we actually did,
Yeah, it's
we decided that
interesting.
it wasn't, we kind of landed on that word, the facilities aspect,
Mhm.
because we thought, well, so what if the operations center was not accessible?
Mhm.
But they would, but all the other services were, that would mean that they would be able to achieve the end. So we decided, yeah, okay, that is actually covering ground that's not covered by the end.
Mhm.
Is the policy language clear and understandable? Yes, but we also,
This is really, I'm sorry.
what?
I'm just going, you know, it's really interesting. It makes me think whether that's 1.1 is an end.
No.
Sorry. Sorry.
We did, we wondered what the difference was between accessibility and discrimination. So like, was it, you know, can you provide accessibility? Like, doesn't that mean that you're not discriminating against people?
Mhm.
Policy is still very relevant, and it does follow the sizes principles related to the higher level. So for businesses with an EL, we went down to the next set of questions, and we're wondering, is that first one supposed to be, is there an area of significant risk that has been identified since this policy was? It says, is this an area of significant risk that has been identified since the policy was written? We chose to interpret that as, is there an area of significant risk that's been identified since the policy was written? And we said, yes, bus stops and boat ride. Monitoring reports or other circumstances created a question or concern about the adequacy of the policy. We said, yeah, we wondered whether high gold ride fares were discriminatory against seniors. And that's when we ran out of time.
Okay. Yeah, so there's some really, it's interesting when you look at these side by side, right? And you go,
Yeah.
This is, how do they, you know, how do they fit, or is it sort of an over duplication? But anyway,
And you
I will
almost want your
complicate this.
goals to interact, right?
Yeah.
Because, you know, you have the ends policies, and then these are executive limitation policy, and they're speaking to each other sort of,
Mhm.
but maybe not as explicitly.
Mhm.
We weren't sure how to think about that.
Yeah, it's so good. When are we looking at this? When are we looking at treatment of the traveling public? I think actually it's up this year, is it not? I think it is. I'm thinking it is just because we said it was the highest, it was probably a high area of risk for the organization.
That's
So,
one to do annual, I'm pretty sure.
yeah, but no, I think we're gonna monitor it, but I think in terms of putting it on the calendar for policy content review, I do believe it's there. And I think that is part of that conversation. So this is a good start to that conversation of going like, how do these fit, and why, you know, why do you see this in both places, or ought they to be in both places?
Next
Good
review in
question.
November.
Pardon me?
We got our next report in November on this one.
Yeah, that's the monitor report though, right? And so we've separated that out from policy content review, which is, let's look at what the policy actually says and just do exactly what you've been doing, which is, how does this address, right, the question about if you wanted to specifically say bus stops? I'm not saying you should, but it's like, how would you write it so that it would be clearer, right? If that was something that you thought should be, and I think there was something else you and I had a conversation about around these policies too, but I can't remember what it was. So it doesn't matter. It's okay. I'm just confusing things, but anyways, I think, like I said, part of it is to just get into some in-depth conversation about the policies and what's written in them, because that hasn't been a standard practice for the board. So Okay, so this says, yeah, we should be definitely looking at treatment of the traveling public this year.
Remember correctly, the last monitoring committee, we identified 3 policy reviews to recommend to the board at the next board meeting,
Yeah.
right?
And I do think
Yeah.
treatment of the traveling public was one of them. I think planning is another one. And I don't remember the other one, but it's okay. I haven't figured out, oh, no, we did. The monitoring task force was very good at doing policy content review as well, even though we're not supposed to cross the two. I think, identified some work to be done there. So, okay, so how about the group in here?
We started with treatment of the traveling public as well. But since we just talked about that, maybe we'll go on. We also talked about discussion number 2, communication and support of the board. And we found some, we basically just went through the questions on the first page. And did have some concerns about just some of the incidental information that is included here. Things that might belong elsewhere or things that are very ambiguous. So like 1.9, I know the numbering is different in the actual policy manual, but strategic context and some of the budget information as well. We have questions about in terms of just clarity and whether they are in the right place. I think generally we were okay with, we thought it hadn't been an area of significant risk since the policy was written. Yeah, Susan, Mike, anything to add?
No, I think, yeah, go ahead, Mike.
First of all, this first question under executive limitations, where Jesse was talking about this versus there is an area. Is there an area? Is there an area? Or is this an area? We interpreted it as this. We decided no, all the way. And on the first one, having to do with, and I don't have it in front of me. Regarding facilities. On the other hand, the second question on monitoring reports created questions about the adequacy of the policy. We certainly recalled the discussions about regarding facilities again, particularly having to do with bus stops. And the next question, worries about the content, worries or concerns about might have about any areas that needs to be incorporated with further levels of policy. Of course, we had the ADA discussion, I think it was at the last board meeting, in terms of the discrimination against disability discrimination. Anyway, those were 2 items that might fall into those 2 questions. I don't think we found anything else on any of these other questions. But Rose, I would like to add something that actually we didn't discuss in our little breakout session, but it certainly has to do with policy content review. In your attachment to what we got that was called an essential tool. You have a sentence in there when you're discussing board agenda, and I'll read the sentence. One regularly scheduled agenda item should be policy content review. My question is, did you mean that at every board meeting? Or
No, regular doesn't.
that should be considered for every board?
Yeah, I think the approach that the monitoring task force is going to bring to the board, I would characterize as regular. right? It's just saying annually, right? Annually,
Yeah.
you're going to identify 2 or 3 policies that will be the subject of policy content review, and selecting that number because of the process of going to the committees and coming back to the board, and knowing that things tend to take kind of some time in the way the board operates, and saying that's a reasonable number. So that's, I would characterize that as regular content review.
Okay, and that's what we did discuss
Yeah,
at the monitoring task
just
force.
saying,
I just wanted to clarify.
start doing it.
And we do have now an actual agenda item that says policy. That thanks to Rich, we reorganized the agenda. So we can't forget that, but I just wanted to confirm that we don't have to do that at every board meeting.
No.
Okay,
Although the way the process is designed, you probably will end up doing it at pretty much every board meeting.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, now the CEO meeting room group.
Sure. Okay. So we focused on ends policy number 4. We had a lot of discussion. We were trying to remember when we developed these policies. We were highly focused on customers highly satisfied with public transportation services. And we discussed what is the value. We discussed, is this part of why we exist? Do we exist to provide customers who are highly satisfied? We couldn't necessarily say that that was why we provide services, but on the other hand, it is very value driven. It's very important that our customers are highly satisfied. We identified that it might be already discussed under asset protection. I believe it was 2.75, not to endanger the organization's public image, credibility, or its ability to accomplish the ends. But right there, I'm catching that it mentions the ends, which is where this is housed. We thought that maybe better verbiage could help with this policy. Why do we choose highly satisfied over satisfied? But we also felt that it was a really important statement for the public to understand that that is important to us. And to me, the ends are more aspirational than the executive limitations are guidelines, whatever, but the ends are more aspirational because there are certainly things in our ends that we are not currently achieving that we're working towards. And so we really kind of got stuck on that, trying to figure out if it needed to stay there or maybe be housed under other asset protection or treatment of the traveling public. And we're hoping to get feedback from others on that. Did I get everything, Carla? Yep.
It's an interesting one because we were just saying in the policy that you were just talking about, it's just like customer satisfaction metrics. And you were like, okay, if you're presenting this as a metric, how is this an end, right? And I mean, my bias here is that I often see customer satisfaction or whatever, client, patient, et cetera, satisfaction is often a metric of something, or it's used as a way, it's used as part of the reasonable interpretation of the achievement of something else, or the compliance with good service. So it's a funny one, and I know it was a topic of hot conversation at the last time we did ends, and so I think it's useful to revisit to go like, yeah.
We ended up having a similar point about the place of values, where if anywhere are values expressed.
Under governing style. So if as a board, you want to say, we have, and this, so often boards will say, here's our kind of our values, which we normally in any other system would just post on the wall and forget them, like we're gonna write them on the wall. It's nice. But what I often suggest is if there are values that you want to stay, so we're talking about customer satisfaction is one of saying, is that we govern with the following values in mind, right? So that's saying front and center, these are the things that we are going to keep front of mind when we craft policy, when we set direction, et cetera. And so it might be, for example, this is often this is one of the places that I often suggest to boards that they start to first address equity and access and inclusion of saying like, you probably need to say that as a board, you are going to keep those values front of mind when you, as you govern. So similar thing, if you have a set of values and you have values that you want to reflect on, or you think it would be worthwhile to articulate that, that's where it goes, is in saying, this guides us in terms of how we as a board are going to act. So it's not in suggesting or imposing that the organization is going to have those values and saying we're having those, because often part of strategic planning, right, is a way of developing operational or organizational values that serve a different purpose. So, yeah. Okay, anything else as we get, oh, we have
So would that be to do?
4 minutes.
You were saying that we need to.
Yes, this is the next steps called, oh, we need to, can I do that? We can probably, yeah, we can do that again. But yes, I think it's saying, okay, so coming out of today, what are some obvious, or maybe not so obvious, kind of next steps? Things you just want to flag, right?
Can we just review how the policy, as you said, there's now policy review that's
Content review.
happening.
Okay.
Is that in a committee?
It's coming, it is going to come to the, oh, it's going to come to the board. Well, Mike, you could explain this because it's coming out of the monitoring task force. But you have to.
Thanks, Rose. I don't have my notes handy from our last meeting.
Okay, sorry.
You proved you have a better memory than I by recalling something.
Yeah, no, don't count on that, but let me
You.
try. What and so who
I'll
else?
try to find my notes.
Byron are both on this committee, both on the task force as well. But the idea was to, not the idea, but the recommendation coming to the board is to say that the board should identify 2 or 3 policies annually at the start of its planning year, which is October, something like that, October, November, to identify those policies that it's going to schedule for content review in the coming year. And then we also, the task force also identified for the coming year, here are the 3 policies to be worked on, and here are the committees that would take the lead in that initial content review, and that we probably develop some shaping in terms of
We
what to
also
do with that.
discussed possibly not waiting until October to make the recommendation now and get a head start on some of the
Yes,
policies versus, oh, we're gonna do this, but we're gonna wait till October.
Yeah,
So,
because it is April or May, whatever month this is. It's almost May. So at the May board meeting, yes.
Right.
So yes, thank you for that. Yeah. It was saying, let's not just wait till November.
Right.
Let's get started. So that's the intention is, and then every year you would say, okay, here's the next 3 that we want to work on. But the ones that I think we picked were ones where there'd been some, either because they were the kind of the significant ones. So I mean, treatment of the traveling public is a natural. And then there are a couple of others where there's just they need some work.
But a caveat with that is that if something else comes up that's pressing, it's not, these don't override anything else. You can still look at anything at any time.
Yeah. And then, did we say anything about ends? I think we said something about that it would be useful to start to think about when the next kind of significant ends review would take place. That needed to be done in cooperation with, the CEO, because they precipitate the start of strategic planning, and you don't want to get too out of, you don't want to be, out of sync with that. But also it starts to identify, to set up and say, okay, there's probably some areas of either board education, some areas that we want to become more deeply informed about or think about in order to prepare ourselves for that ends process. And that might not be for the next, year and a half or 2 years or whatever. But it was saying it's getting timely just because, like we said the last time, we did a really, overview kind of was 2019. Yeah. So it's been a while and context has changed fairly significantly. Yeah. Okay. So let me just see if there's anything else that's, oh, brilliant. Oops. Is there, okay, what's going on here? Okay, I don't know what the next slide says. It might say something like, I don't, do you have it? It's on there. I probably didn't put it on there. Oh, I think it was, so it's probably just more a reflection in terms of, we've identified some next steps. There we go. So learning and insight is, I think, probably would be helpful just to understand how, if this has been helpful, what we might have done differently, is there anything else that would be helpful to get from me in the near future or whatever. So who'd like to start?
Yes, it's the idea in the policy reviews that we're talking about to follow the same set of questions roughly.
Yeah, well, yeah, I think we'll probably shape those up a bit more so that they're not quite as, those are a little bit, there's a little bit too much in them. So,
Yeah, we got stuck on a couple of them, so I think it does make sense. I thought it like to have this sort of a dry run for the process.
yes,
And
I
I
would
thought
say
that
like,
was very valuable.
okay, okay, great.
We don't have to spend that hour at the beginning of that work
Yeah.
time learning, sort of this methodology.
Yeah, but
That
but
seems
probably
very
helpful to
useful.
maybe make it a bit more precise or,
I
yeah,
think
okay.
so, yeah.
Okay, other insights or learnings?
I'm still, I learned a lot. It's still sort of can make my head spin digging into like a policy, but I definitely feel like I'm moving forward and learning more and,
Okay.
Practice sessions like this definitely are helping that.
Okay, great, thank you. Might as well just go around the room.
No, I agree.
Okay.
It's just a helpful exercise.
Yeah, I mean, the scope of the work is still very daunting.
Mm,
And I think having it been done, I very appreciate the work that the task force is, undertaking to put that down on the paper so that I think I can fall into a trap of trying to think of too many things at one time, unless it's right down in front of me. Being able to chunk the work is very important. That's gonna be very important for me.
okay,
I
Yeah.
also think that's something that you shared was really important earlier when we talked about how the process is relatively simple. Really, what we're trying to achieve, it's just getting there can get kind of muddy, we
Yeah.
can spin our wheels and things like that. It was important for me to hear that because sometimes I get tripped up in my own mind when I'm trying to think things through. So knowing that even a governance coach can see that was very helpful to me.
yeah, it's not, so I come going, that's interesting, I don't have an answer to that. It's,
Yeah, I mean, I was one of the folks that requested this training, because I was going into it thinking, oh, well, we gotta make sure that we're ready to write policy. And I think for me, I was thinking very, like, at the very top of the high level, but very broad. And I'm like, now let's modify, whereas now it's really just making sure that we clarify, if needed, what we need to do. So I think the exercise and the framework would be very helpful for that.
okay, great, good.
I'm more confused.
Oh, dear.
Only
That's
that was-
okay.
That was writing policy, but I think like when we adopted policy governance, it all made sense to me. Well, it mostly made sense to me.
Mhm.
And then there's been changes and iterations and like, I think in some of the policies, it's clear that we lost focus on what the bigger picture was. And I think kind of now we have to go through the process of backing back out and looking at the policy more cohesively and more at a high level. I think when we try to do the detailed work first without remembering the context, it gets more complicated.
Yeah, okay,
That's a good.
Yeah.
yeah. I appreciate that, because I think it's sometimes when you, decide you're going to implement policy governance and you spend a lot of time and you develop your policies, going like, good, that's done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we're like, yeah, no, that's actually just the beginning, right? Because it is a living document. It is, as we said, it's the fundamental tool for governing. And so you have to use them and reuse them. And it's why I've been so adamant about saying you really need to do some regular systematic content review, because there's some you know, context changes, right? And there's more contemporary ways of thinking about some things. And so take advantage of that and
We also
Go
need to
back
be
to
gentle
that
with
word.
ourselves. I mean,
Oh,
we just didn't- we
absolutely.
Just came out of
Yeah.
a pandemic and we didn't
Yeah.
operate the way we would have been operating like we did beforehand. So
Yeah.
we're sort of trying to regain our momentum, I think.
Yeah,
So,
fair enough. Yeah, absolutely.
I think it's been a
Yes.
really good symbiotic relationship though with the CEO.
Yeah.
right? Because he doesn't take advantage of us in case there is some money stuff. And then we also critically think about the way that sometimes he interprets the data he provides. So
Yep.
I think that two-way street is really important for us to succeed.
Yeah.
And I think we do.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Are you closed
Okay.
up on this?
We're closed out. We're,
Okay, then I just have a little business to do. The
Okay.
last business is, we don't have anybody in the public, do we? No, okay. The last thing is the motion for adjournment.
So,
Oh. Somebody has to make a motion. You make a motion, Rich? Kyra made a motion? Motion. Yeah. Stephanie, Chris, and all agreed, raise your hand. That passed unanimously, and we are adjourned.
all right. Thank you.
Everybody. Yes, straight to the next meeting.
Let's go.